In 1994, a Kurdish shepherd was moving his flock across a limestone hillside in southeastern Turkey when one of his animals fell into a hole in the ground. He pulled it out. Then he looked into the hole. What he saw made him walk to the nearest town and find someone with authority to listen. What that someone eventually found, after the right people were notified and the right equipment was brought in, was a structure beneath that hillside that rewrote the established timeline of human civilization, not by a few centuries, but by several thousand years. The site is now famous. Academics have written about it, documentaries have covered it. And yet, the single most important implication of what was found there, the implication that changes everything else we think we know about, who built what, and when, and why, is still not reflected in the standard textbooks. Turkey sits on a piece of earth that human beings have been doing extraordinary things on for longer than our current historical model is comfortable admitting. Today we go through 5 places that prove it, and we start with the one the shepherd found. Göbekli Tepe. The hole in the ground led to a complex of circular stone enclosures. Each enclosure was built from T-shaped limestone pillars, some of them 5.5 meters tall and weighing up to 20 tons, arranged in precise circles with 2 taller central pillars facing each other at the center of each ring. The pillars were carved, not scratched, carved, with bas-relief images of animals executed with a skill and confidence that takes generations of artistic tradition to produce. Foxes, boars, cranes, scorpions, vultures, each animal rendered with anatomical accuracy and compositional sophistication. And the date of construction returned by multiple independent radiocarbon analyses of organic material found in the fill was approximately 600 BC, 11,600 years ago. The problem this creates for modern history is specific and serious. The accepted model of human development states that agriculture came first, that humans settled into farming communities, produced food surplus, developed the organizational complexity that surplus allows, and then built monumental architecture as an expression of that complexity. Göbekli Tepe inverts this sequence completely. The people who built it were hunter-gatherers. There is no evidence of permanent settlement at the site, no evidence of agriculture, no evidence of the surplus food production that the model says is required before you can organize a workforce large enough to quarry, transport, and erect 20-ton carved limestone pillars. The workforce required to build Göbekli Tepe has been estimated by structural archaeologists at between 500 and 1,000 people working in coordinated shifts. Feeding and organizing 500 to 1,000 people in coordinated labor in 9600 BC, without agriculture, without a permanent settlement, without the administrative infrastructure that complex societies develop over centuries of sedentary living, is something our model of that period says was not possible. Göbekli Tepe was not just built, it was deliberately buried. Around 8000 BC, the builders filled every enclosure with limestone rubble, flint tools, and animal bones and covered the entire complex. They buried their own monument. With care, no damage to the structures, no evidence of destruction or invasion. They chose to enter what they had built, and they did it methodically. The question of why a civilization capable of this level of construction would choose to bury it rather than continue building it has not been answered to the satisfaction of anyone who has seriously examined it. Derinkuyu underground city, Cappadocia. In 1963, a man in the Cappadocia region of central Turkey was renovating his home. He knocked down a wall in his basement and found a tunnel behind it. The tunnel led to another tunnel, which led to a chamber, which led to another level below. By the time the full extent of what lay beneath his home was mapped, archaeologists had documented an underground city extending 18 levels below the surface to a depth of approximately 85 meters, capable of housing between 20,000 and 50,000 people, with ventilation shafts, with wells, with stables, with wineries, with chapels, with schools, with rolling stone doors that could be sealed from the inside that were too heavy for a small number of people to move. Derinkuyu is not a cave system. It is not a natural formation with human modifications. It is a planned, engineered, multi-level urban environment built entirely underground with a level of organizational and technical sophistication that the accepted history of the Cappadocia region in the relevant period does not account for. The official explanation attributes Derinkuyu to the early Christian communities of Cappadocia who used underground spaces to hide from Roman persecution in the 1st centuries AD. This explanation has a problem. The ventilation system at Derinkuyu is one of the most sophisticated aspects of the construction. There are 52 ventilation shafts connecting the lower levels to the surface. The deepest shaft reaches 85 meters. Cutting a ventilation shaft 85 meters through solid volcanic tough rock with iron tools while simultaneously constructing 18 levels of chambers and corridors around it requires engineering planning that begins at the surface with the ventilation system and works downward. You cannot add ventilation to an 85-meter deep underground city after you build it. You plan it before the first stone is cut. The planning required precedes the construction by a significant period. The construction itself took generations. The Christian communities of Cappadocia under Roman persecution were not in a position to begin a multi-gender city construction project. They used spaces that already existed. The question of who originally built Derinkuyu and when has not been officially answered. The archaeological layers at the deepest levels of the city have not been fully dated. The dating that has been done suggests the lower levels are significantly older than the early Christian period. How much older is not established in the published record. Çatalhöyük. In the Konya Plain of south-central Turkey, there is a site called Çatalhöyük that was occupied continuously from approximately 7500 BC to 5700 BC. For 1,800 years, the same community lived in the same location and built, rebuilt, and maintained a settlement that at its peak housed between 5,000 and 10,000 people. This makes it one of the earliest and largest Neolithic settlements ever found. What makes it significant beyond its size and age is what it reveals about the social organization of the people who lived there. Çatalhöyük had no streets. The buildings were constructed directly against each other with no gaps between them. Access to every building was through a hole in the roof. The inhabitants moved across the settlement by walking across the rooftops and descending into their homes through ceiling openings. Every building was approximately the same size. There is no evidence of a central administrative building, no palace, no temple larger than the domestic structures, no evidence of a ruling class with materially superior living conditions. The settlement of up to 10,000 people operated for 1,800 years without a visible hierarchy, without a central authority, without the administrative architecture that every model of complex human settlement says is required to organize communities beyond a few hundred people. The burial practices at Çatalhöyük add another layer of complexity. The dead were buried beneath the floors of the living spaces, not in a separate cemetery, under the floor of the room where the family lived. Skulls were sometimes removed from buried bodies after decomposition and kept in the living space, plastered and painted, and placed in positions that suggest continued relationship with the deceased. The art found at the site is sophisticated and consistent. Geometric wall paintings executed with pigments prepared from mineral sources requiring specific knowledge of mineral chemistry. Animal reliefs modeled in plaster on the interior walls, showing the same compositional confidence as Göbekli Tepe. A community of 10,000 people living without hierarchy, burying their dead beneath their feet, maintaining sophisticated artistic traditions, and doing all of this 9,500 years ago in central Turkey for 1,800 continuous years. The model of Neolithic society that the textbooks describe does not produce Çatalhöyük. Çatalhöyük produces a different model, and that model has not yet replaced the one in the textbooks. The Hittite capital of Hattusa. In north-central Turkey in the Çorum province, there are the remains of a city that was the capital of an empire that controlled most of Anatolia and competed directly with Egypt as one of the two dominant powers of the ancient Near East for approximately 500 years between 1600 BC and 1180 BC. The Hittite Empire signed the world's first recorded peace treaty with Egypt after the Battle of Kadesh in 1274 BC. The treaty text survives in both Hittite and Egyptian versions, and a reproduction of it hangs in the United Nations headquarters in New York as the symbolic ancestor of all international agreements. The empire that produced it operated from a capital city called Hattusa, whose physical remains demonstrate a level of urban planning, military engineering, and administrative sophistication that the conventional history of Bronze Age Anatolia does not fully account for. The walls of Hattusa extended for 8 kilometers around the city perimeter. The construction used a technique called cyclopean masonry, in which enormous stone blocks were fitted together without mortar in a configuration that has survived 3,200 years of Anatolian earthquakes. The city contained multiple temple complexes, a royal citadel, administrative districts, and a chamber carved into the bedrock beneath the city walls called Yerkapi, which contains 2 tunnels 80 meters long, passing completely through the earthen rampart of the city's southern wall. The tunnels served no defensive function. They are too narrow for military use and too long to be efficient entrances. They are precisely cut, corbel-vaulted stone tunnels passing through the base of the most heavily fortified section of the city wall for a purpose that has not been officially established. The Hittites who built Hattusa left extensive written records in their cuneiform archive, the largest Bronze Age archive found in Anatolia. Those records describe the tunnels as associated with ritual emergence. What the ritual was, what emerged, and from where the tradition of ritual emergence through underground tunnels derived are questions the archive does not fully answer. Mount Nemrut. In the Adıyaman province of southeastern Turkey, at an altitude of 2,134 meters on the summit of Mount Nemrut, there is a tomb sanctuary built by a minor regional king named Antiochus I of Commagene sometime around 62 BC. Antiochus was the ruler of a small kingdom in southeastern Anatolia, a buffer state between the Roman and Parthian empires with limited military power and modest territorial extent. He had no empire. He had no vast labor resources. He had no particular political legacy that would justify the construction of what he built. And yet, what he built on the summit of Mount Nemrut is one of the most extraordinary construction achievements of the ancient world. The summit of the mountain is covered by an artificial tumulus, a mound of crushed limestone chips approximately 50 meters high and 150 meters in diameter. The tomb chamber of Antiochus is presumably somewhere within or beneath this mound. It has never been found. Every excavation attempt has failed to locate it. Around the base of the tumulus on 3 terraces, east, west, and north, Antiochus arranged colossal stone statues of himself seated among the gods. Each statue originally stood between 8 and 9 meters tall. The heads of the statues, which have fallen from the seated bodies over the centuries, are between 1.5 and 2 meters in height and weigh several tons each. The statues depict Antiochus in the company of Greek, Armenian, and Persian deities simultaneously, a theological fusion that reflects the geopolitical position of Commagene between East and West. The craftsmanship of the statues is extraordinary. The compositional arrangement of the terraces is sophisticated. The astronomical alignments of the site have been studied by researchers who have found correlations between the terrace orientations and specific celestial configurations. What the site cannot be explained by is the resources of the kingdom of Commagene. Antiochus ruled a small buffer state. The Mount Nemrut construction required quarrying enormous stone blocks, transporting them to the summit of a 2,134-meter mountain, and executing their carving and placement with a precision that even well-resourced empires struggled to achieve. The labor, the logistics, the engineering, and the theological conception of the site all exceed what a minor regional king with a modest treasury and a small population should have been able to produce. The inscriptions Antiochus left at the site describe his motivation as the establishment of a place where he would be worshipped as a god in perpetuity. What they do not describe is where he obtained the resources, the engineering knowledge, and the workforce to build it. That part of the story has no official answer. The statues sit at 2,134 meters looking out over southeastern Turkey, and they have been waiting for that answer for over 2,000 years.